The Drum Candy podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode 36 of the Drum Candy podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This week's guest is the great modern jazz drummer, educator, and author Ulysses Owens Jr. Ulysses has performed with the greats of modern jazz, including Christian McBride and Kurt Elling. He also leads his own band. He's a producer. He's written 2 books as of now, and there's more on the way. One is called The Musician's Career Guide that came out in 2021, and he also has Jazz Brushes for the Modern Drummer that came out in 2020. He's on faculty at Julliard School of Music. Very busy man, so we're focusing this entire episode on what it takes to get an authentic jazz sound. So let's get to it with Ulysses Owens Jr. First question, kind of appropriate. Your hectic schedule.
Yes.
Gigging, leading a band, producing records, making records. You're an author, I believe, teaching. So what is the primary focus for you right now?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think before I answer it, I have to acknowledge the pandemic, right? So I think, all of us were doing 20, 30 things and doing it extraordinarily. And then pandemic happened. And so work for many of us kind of got redefined. So I would say, though I am all of those things aren't necessarily happening at the same time. Mm. So I would say, like right now, I'm focusing mainly on my work as an educator, which means, I'm now back to school at Julliard. So we are basically doing, 2 classes a week, and all the meetings that, come with that. I then am artistic director at Don't Miss a Beat in Jacksonville, Florida. So I'm, on campus there at least 2 to 3 times a week. So I fly back and forth every week. I'm also a new father. So navigating all of that, as a co-parent, with my son's mother, and she's incredible in terms of, taking care of him and things like that in the midst of my absence, weekly and stuff like that. So I, kind of my time with him is the weekend and all that. And then I think beyond that, I'm always planning other stuff. Like I'm also working on my upcoming book projects because I have a literary agent now. Mm-hmm. So I think that, back to the core of your question, I think how I manage it all is I decide like what are kind of the core tenets. So for me, Monday, I'll say it like this, like Fridays through Mondays, that's sort of like my Florida, like time, to make sure everything is cool with Don't Miss a Beat. Everything is cool, with my son and, whatever else that's kind of Florida related. Then I have, sort of Tuesday through Thursday, which is kind of my, New York, Julliard, whatever other things I need to be doing with my management kind of here. Then there's like virtually, where I'm, talking to my literary agent once every couple of weeks. And we're saying, okay, based on these, upcoming book proposals for these new book projects, like here are the different like moments you need to turn things in and, stuff like that. So I think I'm kind of isolated in that right now. And then we get to like February where I'm like back on the road more, and I'm, doing a lot of what I was doing before, but then now I'm, instead of maybe being in Florida, Friday through Monday, I may be somewhere else playing on Saturday. So I think what is important for me is to, one, I can't have any delays in my schedule. Like, so for instance, if someone asks me to do something, like I have to take care of it like within 24 hours, because I always say to them, by the time tomorrow comes, something else is going to happen. So like when you were like, hey, should we reschedule? And I'm like, no, because we'll be emailing for another 2 weeks because something else will happen. So I think the first kind of thing that helps me maintain those core tenets is I take care of things in time. Mm-hmm. So that, I don't forget them or they just get lost in the shuffle. I think another big thing is I have an incredible team, I don't, it's not just me like running all over the place. I have a great manager, I have an assistant. And then like for Florida, I have, my family. I also have an assistant and kind of business manager there. Like I said, I've got, several agents. Like I've got probably a team of, 10, 12 people who at will I can get to help me to get things done. So I'm not this like mastermind guy that's like just got his shit together and, doing everything perfectly. No, I have a lot of really smart people in my life that help me execute. Mm. And then I would say the last piece of that is I'm very important about what's valuable to me. So like when you hit me up on Instagram, having had my own show where I interview drummers, I was honored that you reached out to me. But then secondly, I saw kind of what your vibe was about. And I saw like kind of you really want to get to the heart of the drummer, and you really want to like ask sincere questions. And like, it's a mission and vision for you. So I was like, I want to interact with this guy, but I've also been approached by other people where I didn't feel that. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, I'm very value driven, where I'm like, okay, if this person or this thing or this entity ties into the same kinds of values that I like believe in, then I will partner with them and do something, no matter how micro or macro. If this person doesn't, I'm very kind, but I'm like, hey, I can't do it at this time. So I think being able to say no more than you say yes is what allows you to not be overcommitted. And then it also means that what you do commit to will be excellent. So those are that's kind of a long answer of how I navigate all the different things. But I think every day though, I ask myself the question, like, is this important to me? And I will say, like, once, sort of the last part of this answer, once my son arrived on the planet about a few months ago, that completely changed me, because then it became, is this going to help me build a future for him? Is this going to help me to make, his life better? Is it going to help me to have more time with him? So then the focus became like, because now like I'm in charge, obviously with his mother, but now I'm in charge of a life and a future. So like, now it's not just like, oh, I'll go and do this 3-week tour in Europe and just like make some money and just hang out and see my friends. Now it's like, well, that's 3 weeks away from him. So, so I think that having a child also made me really be more future driven. Even with my manager, I was like, hey, we need to like kick this up a notch. I have a son now. Like, I need to be making sure that I can pay for college. I need to be making sure I can pay for whatever he needs today. Like, and he was like, all right, so I became even more laser focused when I realized that I have an addition, to my life that I'm responsible for.
Right on. So with you traveling so much, do you take advantage of that time to be productive and creative, or is that your time to zone out? Okay. Oh, absolutely. So for me, I don't have any dead time. Like, so for instance, like if I'm traveling, first of all, I really love spending time alone. Like I'm a loner. Same. So yeah, that time, like if I'm up in the morning, like, I just got recently into audiobooks. So once I'm up in the morning, I'm either listening to an audiobook, like something that's feeding the spirit constantly. And I don't mean spirit in that like religious, but meaning like, is it feeding a business idea I have, or is it or just teaching me something about the world? Or like my book projects coming up, I've been doing a lot of reading about like sort of the history of the Black American life. So I've been ingesting a lot of stuff from really notable authors. So from the morning, I'm taking in something, or it's a podcast or whatever. Then, I'm checking my emails constantly. Like, what do I need to respond to? And then, even when I'm eating and reading a book, or I'm eating and watching a documentary. Like, so I think for me, that's another thing when I'm traveling, I'm not just like, oh, let me just focus on the gig. Yeah, I'm focusing on the gig, but I'm also building these other things while I'm focusing on the gig. So I'm also like saying, all right, I have a to-do list every day. And I look at it every night before the next morning. And so I say, okay, what needs to be done? And then it's like short-term and long-term. And then I'm like, okay, during the day, what can I get done before it's time for like sound check or to focus on like learning music or whatever? But yeah, so I think that's kind of what helps me when I travel, is that I don't stop working, versus I know some musicians, they go on the road and they're like, hey, if it ain't about the gig, don't talk to me. I can't afford to do that, being an artistic director and a small ensemble director and a writer and I tell people all the time, like, I can never sign off. Like, I always laugh, like during the holidays, you email somebody and you get that little like reply like, hey, I will be answering emails after such and such date. I'm like, I've never been given that luxury. Like, if I don't respond to emails in 3 weeks, it's a lot of shit that's going to fall, and not saying that that my team can't handle it, but I don't ever sign off completely. I mean, like, I have my days in the week, like Sundays are kind of my days where I'm like, I see my son, I spend time with family, and maybe I just like, and like take in good music. But other than that, like, I have to be going every day until I get where I want to go. Because I feel like I'm not where I want to be yet. So I feel like if you, in one regard, you're hearing people be like, man, how do you achieve your dreams? But if you like, man, I don't do anything on the weekend, well, then something has to balance. Now, if I all of a sudden look up and, I'm a multimillionaire and I have properties all over the place and I have a great college fund for my son, and I'm booked 200 days out of the year with my projects, and I got,
label is doing well and all, like, then yeah, we can send an auto reply. But I ain't there. So until that day comes, I will be working every day.
That's called ambition, folks. That's called ambition. So where does drumming fall into your daily routine and practice?
Well, that's a really great question. So I've been, as of December 6th, I turned 39. And I've been playing drums since I was 2 years old. So I've been playing drums for 37 years. Mm-hmm. So at this point, my love for the drums is so incredibly deep. And it's really something that is just, it's part of me. It's like breathing for me, right? So I think my goals as a drummer now are more around as being a band leader and drummer, because now it's like, how do I, I'm not really doing sideman stuff anymore. So it's like, how do I make sure that my chops and the things that are important to me as a drummer to communicate through the music don't falter? So yeah, I think for me, I like to make sure I'm playing several times a week, or I make sure, at least playing once a week. But I think as a drummer, my goals are shifting. And I'm doing a lot of like educational things. But I mean, I love the instrument so much that like, I'm going to make sure that I'm playing on the level I need to play on. So for instance, during the pandemic, I started a jam session in Florida and I was playing every week. And that really took me to like the next level as a drummer, just, getting the chops kind of dusted off. Now that I'm kind of back to touring and like, I know that I have, 5 to 10 gigs a month, I feel like in the touring, in the playing, all that kind of helps me to keep that stuff happening. And then, yeah, I think goals as a drummer, I'm more focused now. Like before it was like, oh, I want to be really like a really great funk drummer and a great this and a great that. Now it's like, man, I'm a jazz drummer. Like I'm a jazz drummer. I'm unashamed about it. I'm unashamed of the focus of that. And I love it. And I want, like now I think about drummers like Billy Higgins. I think about drummers, like Frankie Dunlap. And when I play the kit now, I'm like, I want to sound like an authentic jazz drummer. So I think that's what my focus is now. So what helps me with that is the listening. So I now find myself going back and listening to more records than I did. Like the pandemic made me fall back in love with listening to jazz, because jazz was such work for me in terms of like, being on the road and all that, like the work and the touring and all that kind of took away from the love of it because I was just so busy. But then when the pandemic happened, it allowed me to fall back in love with it. So as a result of it, I now find myself, listening to records or playing along the records and be like, wow, okay, like cymbal beat sounds good. You need to round it out more, or, I just switched over from Vic Firth to ProMark and from Remo to Evans. So that has changed my sound completely. So I literally played a gig Sunday and I was like, okay, I think I'm finally settling into like what this new sound I have like as a drummer, because I've just changed gear. And you know how that is, like when you change gear, it takes you a while to like kind of find your footing, because I've been playing the same kind of stuff for at least like 7-8 years. So I feel like I'm more excited to be a drummer now, because I feel like there's, I haven't toured heavily in like 2 years. So every time I play, it's like new and fresh. And even like the last 3 times I've played in the last few weeks, I sound different. I'm like, wow, like I hear something different evolving in my sound. And I think it's because of all the stuff I've been, going through in my life, and that affects your sound. So I think that to answer your question, I think being like where drums fall in, I'm really excited about being a drummer now. Like I'm excited about it. And I feel like a freshness about it, because I feel like for many years it was like, oh, I play drums to make a living. Now I make a living being an educator, an author and like entrepreneur. And then I play drums because I love it. So it's like, it's sort of flipped. So I'm able to like approach the instrument kind of like with a childlike sense of love, versus before it was like, oh, get these cymbals, man, I gotta go make this money, so I'm glad. So I think the more ambitious I become with these other business pursuits, I can actually like love the drums like how I used to love it as a kid. Yeah. So that's, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that takes me right into the main topic. A student comes to you, I mean, let's say they've got several years under their belt of playing the instrument. So they can play the instrument, but they really want to learn how to be an authentic sounding jazz drummer. So if you're tracing through your progression and how you've kind of digested all this history, where would you take someone day one? Would you go chronological? Would you say, well, you got to go back to Louis Armstrong and start there? Right. Or do you go, what do you like now? Like or pick a drummer? What would be your path?
Right. So I'm so glad you were talking about this, because I'm actually in one of my meetings I have coming up soon is with a major drum entity online, and they want me to come on board because of my jazz educational background, and they want me to kind of start a whole thing. And so and let me also mention that I have several courses with an entity called Open Studio Jazz, and one is called Finding Your Beat, another is The Art of Swing, and the other is Jazz Drumming 101, which kind of addresses some of what I'm about to talk about. So but what I'm excited about with this meeting I'm getting ready to have is that I think it's going to put me in a position where I can present a more fundamental approach to jazz drumming to a larger body of people. So I just want to say that first. To answer your question, I have to start with what is disgusting me first. What is disgusting me is, first of all, I want to say I love Instagram, and I love, I'm not on TikTok and all that, but I love what social media is doing and how it is empowering the artist. I think we no longer are trapped and no longer are voiceless. So I love that. And I'm incredibly grateful to social media. I mean, you wouldn't have even found me had it not been for social media. So let me state that. My second thing is, what disgusts me is that what the truth is about anything is now being so diluted, right? And so to your point, when a drummer starts with me, the first thing I say to them is, what is your goal? So they say, hey, I'm coming to you because I want to be a really good jazz drummer. And I've had drummers say, oh man, I want to be the next you. And I say to them, no, I'm already taken. So like, who do you want to be? But I say to them, what is your goal? Like, is your goal that you want to have a sustainable career? You want to be known, as a really talented jazz drummer. You want to be hired by the masters. And they say, yes, that's what I want, because that's what I wanted. Like, there was no social media. There was no Instagram. I wanted to be able to be the drummer that when people thought about, man, I got a great band and I want to play this music, and I want this music is also linked to Elvin and Roy and all the lineages of jazz drummers that have changed my life. I wanted to be part of that lineage. So I wanted it to be, you got Roy, Elvin, and all them. Then you got Lewis, Nash, Tain, and whatever. Then you got, Hutch and Willie Jones and the Sheep. Then you got my generation, Kendrick and, Jonathan Blake and myself. And then now you got this whole other generation. So that's what I wanted to do, was be part of the canon of great jazz drummers. With that said, when a student arrives to me, I say, because of that, you have to start at the beginning of that canon. And you have to start at the beginning of that canon multidimensionally. So hands, you got to study the rudiments. If you really want to make sure your rudiments are sound, obviously you download the 28 Essential, but then there are some books that can help. A big thing for me, even if a drummer is interested in jazz, I am really big on classical snare drum technique. So I start drummers with the rudiments, but then a large part of my upbringing, once I got into formal training, was learning like Cerrone, and Delacroix, and Pratt, because I find that in jazz, a lot of times we just are into like concept, kind of like vibing, and the shit's not clean. So what I resonate with is like clean, beautiful chops and groove. So I start them first with the hands, with kind of that journey, and I make a distinction between classical rep and marching. I think marching and bugle corps is great for the sort of the fraternal element of it, and you're out in the field and it's great. It's sportsmanship, but I don't really think it helps you when it comes to drum set, because I've been teaching now over 20 years, and I've seen more players make a great transition from classical to jazz than from marching to jazz because of the touch. So that's the first thing with the hands is, we got to do rudiments. We got to cover some basic classical snare drum stuff. And you just got to understand yourself on like with one drum. Then I transition into, jazz drumming, and I start with the ride cymbal. Like that is, I go back to Jimmy Cobb, my kind of blue, or I go to, really Kenny Clark, who invented the ride cymbal pattern, or at least transferred it from the hi-hat to ride. So I go there, like that's kind of where I start. And then it becomes like style. Then it becomes, okay, well, you got to be able to have a good ride cymbal beat. You got to be able to, especially today, play a bossa, a funk, or whatever, so then I started dealing with all those things. And then from there, it becomes like, you got to just listen to this music. Like what you listen to is what you become, and it's what you sound like. So one of the other things that disgusts me is that none of these new drummers are listening to anything anymore. They're just watching everything. So like somebody will watch our interview before they go check out a record of Kenny Clark. And so that is the other piece. So those are like major things for me. And then the third sort of piece is you got to play. Like you have to play with other people. And I think that is the other part of my disgust is that, I won't mention any names, but there are several people that are very popular right now for jazz drumming, and they don't have any gigs in jazz. And I mean, in one regard, I'm happy for them because as an entrepreneur, I'm like, man, that's some great shit. Like that's some great branding, some great, marketing. But as a gate, I feel like soon I will be one of the, not necessarily gatekeepers, but like holders of the tradition is a better term. I'm like, you have not come into this lineage. Like you have not been part of this lineage. You know what I mean? Like when I got to New York, people were like, for you to be considered legitimate, there are certain people that need to like musically touch you, and so I've gone through, I've had lessons with Kenny Clark, I knew Ralph Peterson, I knew, Michael Carvin and those cats know who I am. Like, I went to the gigs of, Roy Haynes. I went to the gig to see Elvin. I went to go see, like I put my time in. So when for instance, when I started my drum show, when I started reaching out to all these people, all these drummers started calling, even like, when it ended, I was so drugged because I had episodes coming up with like John Riley and like all these great people. Cause they were like, Ulysses, we're so proud of you. Like, we remember when you got here and you like came and you sat on our feet and now you like have your own voice. So to me, that's my problem is that, sort of the third piece of like playing, but also like, you gotta be part of the tradition and you got to be mentored and like taught by the tradition. And so that's the pieces that I don't like now, which is how I inform my students who are interested. Back to your question on how to get better is, got the hands, the technical side, then you got the independence coordination, then you got the records, then you got, you got to check out the masters and you got to, those that are still left, learn from them, or if you can't learn from them, learn from someone who learned from them. And then there's the playing piece. And then, sort of the final thing about that is you have to play this music with other people. You cannot sit and take 20, Instagram video lessons from even Greg Hutchinson, who's my boy. That does not qualify you to be a jazz drummer. That just means that you sat down and learned from a really killer jazz drummer. But what makes Greg Hutchinson who he is that he's going to close that laptop down. He's going to get on stage and he's going to play with 3 or 4 people or whomever, and he's going to sound killer because that is the genius of who he is. And so what we're missing is we're like in front of a laptop and then we think like, all right, I'm good. And then what happens is you get on the bandstand and you're disconnected and you're like, why am I not killing? Why am I not this? Why am I not that? Well, because you spent more time in front of a laptop than you have with a bass player who has breath and who's a human being and a pianist who has breath and who's a human being and connecting. And that's the piece that if we're not careful, we're going to lose the reality of music is connectivity. It's souls and bodies and organisms, all of us connecting through music. And this is just a kind of a supplement to help us to understand more about it. But this is not the new gateway. Even if it means me and these other 2 people play and we play in front of this, we still have to have that connectivity. So anyway, I know that was a long answer.
No, great. I got right to it. So interesting topic. So there's a club here in Pittsburgh that streams gigs and you can go see too. So the other night I was watching my friend Tom Wendt play on a live stream and it sounded beautiful, sounded like a record, but dynamically I was like, oh, they're kind of playing a little quiet, controlled. I went to the club for the second set. They were hitting. So like the way that it translated to the internet, totally different. Like emotionally, I felt like, whoa, that was great. That was like listening to a record, but to be in there where the air was moving and actually feel the rim shots. Can you speak to that? Like the idea of the dynamics of this music. It's not all quiet. It's not all loud. Like what is, the importance of that?
Well, I'll take it further back. I mean, it's like the dynamics of having a conversation. If you and I were having this same conversation at a cafe, it would be even better. I mean, it's killing now, but it would be even better because there's you and I are affected by whatever's happening around us. Who's to say me and you would be talking and a record may come on, and all of a sudden it changes our conversation, right? So and when I moved to New York, one of the things that people kept telling me was, man, we wish you got to see Art Blakey. And I would say, well, if you can't, I couldn't see him, but can you tell me what it was like? And everybody talks to me about when he played that press roll, or like when, people would be lined up and down, the street in front of Sweet Basil's, or, even though he had lost his hearing late in his life, just hearing that, bang, bang, they said it could lift you. So I think for me, that is something that, to your point, I think we have to stay in touch with live music when we can. Obviously we have to be safe first, but when we're able to re-engage, we need to understand exactly what you said. There is a difference. Like live music is like the truth, and streaming is trying to, consolidate that truth to where it's more, accessible. But accessibility does not replace truth. So I think as long as we understand that, if you want to be a successful jazz musician, like you have to, you have to make sure that you have access to experiencing it live. Then I think then once all this stuff is subsided, then I think people will stay in contact and continue to make sure they make time. But I that's why I said I think we have to be careful, because we're kind of replacing. We're kind of been like, oh well, instead of this, then we'll do this. It's like no, we're doing this because this is our only option. But once we're done with this, let's go back to this. Because so to your point, I think we just have to make sure we understand the relevance or the order of relevance of what we should be focused on.
Do you find when you play in a studio that you dynamically play differently, or you try to keep it the same?
Well, so that's always like the difference between like, the first couple takes and, you getting settled in after a couple hours. I typically, when I'm in the studio, I take one can and I kind of have it like half ear, like I'll either do this or I'll kind of even split it. Because what I find is when I put the cans on, and I have really good headphones. I love to use ultrasound headphones, monitors, versus like the in-ears. I can't get into that at all. But I like the ultrasound because of the way they surround my ears. But what I find is that when I'm in the studio, sometimes I play harder when I have the cans on like this. So when I remove the can and I do this, then it's like even my talking voice, you balance it and you actually like play according to how you play live. Because you're like, okay, why am I hitting so, like I don't actually hit that hard. I actually am more relaxed. So those are one of the things that helped me with my touch in the studio, is to make sure I'm hearing myself and the sound of the room, how I am on stage. And then the other can is so that, I can hear the bass and the piano or whatever. But I like to always make sure I have that, because I don't want to change my touch. Unless there's something specific, like I got to dig in and do. But for the most part, I have that hybrid thing with the cans.
You mentioned, clarity and precision. And I think that's a kind of a hallmark of your playing. It's really precise. So I want to, how do you practice that? So we're talking clarity, intensity, lower volumes primarily, and then stick choice. Does that have any role in the situation?
Well, yeah. So I use it. So for many years, I was endorsed by Regal Tip Jazz, or Regal Tip, and I had a signature stick with them, and they also had a stick model that is incredible. It's called the Jazz. And they had it in wood tip and they had it in nylon. And that was like the stick that I found my sound on. And it was because of the length, but also the lightness of it. So I played that stick for a really long time. Then I switched to Vic-Firth recently, before ProMark, and I started playing the MJC2, which was a good stick, but it wasn't a nylon. So I kept using the Regal Tip nylon in my right hand, and I used the MJC2 in the left, because I've always said that the right hand in jazz particularly does different things than the left hand does. Your right hand is going to be playing a cymbal 90% of the time. Your left hand is going to be playing drums. Versus if you're a funk drummer, your right hand is going to be kind of playing, hi-hat, drums. Like it's a little bit more of a equality between what both hands will be doing, versus in jazz, that right hand is completely different. So why am I playing the same stick, for the right hand that I am in the left hand when they have two different roles? Secondly, I got sick of using wood tips that wear out, right? Because I got to a point, especially when I start working a lot, I'd be, having 2-3 recording sessions a week. I'd be playing every night or be on tour every week, or especially like with Kurt or McBride, we'd be on the road 200, 220, 30 days a year. So McBride wants to hear the same thing every night, in terms of my consistency of sound. The same with Kurt and all the other people I play with. So if all of a sudden, I'm on the road for 3 weeks and I've got, 12 or 20 pairs of wood tips, that wood tip is only going to sound the same for about 3 to 4 nights, maybe a week. Then after that, I'm going to be having to pick up a new wood tip. So I got into 9-line because I like the consistency of it, and I never have to worry about it changing on me unless it just breaks. So to your point, the clarity and the consistency does tie it first into the stick. Mm-hmm. And I like a lighter stick because it allows me to play the stick and not the stick to play me. I always tell my students, when we go through the stick selection process, is to choose a stick that you can play, not one that plays you. And what I mean is that when you play a stick, you have the ultimate control over the throw and the manipulation of your wrist and the fingers. Like, you can make that stick do whatever you want it to do. When you play a stick that's too big for you, it's forcing you. It's some sticks can throw your shoulder out or it gets your balance off. And so then you find yourself like you can't even play grooves. So I think stick choice is really important in clarity and consistency and articulation. And then a lesson that Kenny Washington taught me was playing in the center of the drum. When you learn how to play in the center of the drum, which is the hardest shit to do, because the center of the drum, is not always easy because of by the time the tension hits the center, sometimes the center can be softer than the outer edges. So learning how to practice and get your rudiments and the clarity right in the center of the drum, that is a whole other thing. And then on top of that, I practice with the snares off so that you can really hear the sound of the drum and the resonance of the drum. And if you can make a snare sound really good and your rudiments with the snares off, by the time you turn the snares on, that's icing on the cake. So that's a real key thing for me is, the stick choice, practicing in the center of the drum. So I'm getting sound out of the drum, practicing with the snares off. Also, I don't practice 50 rudiments. I always say I do about 5, maybe 3 to 5 rudiments, paradiddle, single stroke, buzz rolls. If you want to really hook up your technique and your clarity, practice buzz rolls in the center of the drum every day for 15 minutes. You do that nonstop, like 15 minutes a day, you will, whatever technical issues you have, I promise you, if you do it 7 days, you will be a different drummer in 7 days. Because it's something about all the stuff you have to work through to make a buzz roll right in the center of the snare drum. It will affect how you play on the ride cymbal. It'll affect how you hit drum, toms and all that. So that's a big thing for me. And then the other part is I'm really into vocal, like I love singers. So I've always said that I wanted my drumming to be as clear as a vocalist. So when I hit, like if I play a solo, I want the same way you hear Sarah Scat or the same way you hear Carmen McRae or, Billy Eckstein, and the clarity and the pacing. I want my drumming to have that same clarity, where it's palatable and accessible. And so that's something I've always liked, because the drummers I love, like Lewis Nash, Alan Dawson, Hig, Philly Joe Jones, like there's a clarity and a consistency and an articulation. And that's, so I'm kind of on that side of the jazz drumming, like Max Roach, like the real clear, articulate, precise drumming versus other drummers who are more so into, maybe more of the kind of looser way or, more like, I don't want to, create the wrong kind of comparisons, but yeah, I've always been into that and into clarity. And some people don't dig that. I mean, I've heard some people, come to me and be like, man, that shit's too clean. I need to be dirty. And I'm like, well, call somebody else.
True, what you're saying.
It's my thing.
What sticks are you using? What's your Pro Mark of choice?
So now what I'm doing with Pro Mark, at some point I'm going to be designing a signature stick with them. But for the time being, I have to say I love their craftsmanship. And I like when they send me a brick of sticks, each stick within the brick feels the same. And you and I both know that's not the case. So I'm using, I think it's the Rebound 7A nylon tip in my right hand. And then I'm using the ProMark, the 7A rebound wood tip in the left, or excuse me, the Elvin Jones in the left hand. I've been also, the reason why I was confused, because sometimes I mess around with they have like a 7A, I think it's a rebound like long, and it's really beautiful. It's kind of an acorn tip. I use that sometimes in the left hand. But yeah, I wanted to bring Elvin's stick back. So yeah, I use the Elvin stick in the left hand, and then, the rebound nylon in the right. I love their brushes. I'm using, I think it's like the TB4 and TB3. I think the TB4 is like the really thin ones. And I love those. And then the TB3 as well, really beautiful. They have like a blue tip on the end. I love ProMark's mallets. They make really great timpani mallets. So I think it's like the PTS. It's actually all of them. It's like the PTS 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm using like all of them. So I like those, but that's kind of what I've kind of found my rhythm with those. I've been with them since about like maybe October-ish. But I would say in the last, couple months, especially since like PASIC in December, the sticks feel like I'm no longer like forcing my technique on the stick. I feel like the stick is now kind of starting to like fit into my hands. So it's been cool.
Nice. What is your Evans head choice?
So it's funny. So when I signed with them, they were like, well, we want you to kind of be like the jazz face of our calf tone head, which I never was like a fiber skin guy. I always loved the sort of ambassador, white coated head. So I was like, okay, I'll check it out. Man, I love these calf tone heads because they really are warm. And I feel like I was in the studio session last weekend, and I was listening to the playbacks, and the toms were so full and punchy, and I felt like when I put the calf tone head on my toms and my bass drum, it's like it really focuses the sound, and it gets like right to the heart of the tone, versus I feel like sometimes with a white coated head, sometimes you got to fight with those overtones. And so I think the calf tone kind of eliminates those overtones, and it gets right to the tonal center of the drum. So I use calf tone on my toms, and I use like the EMAG calf tone on my bass drum. And then on my snare, I still like that G1 coated, sort of white coated sound, because I like to have some of the overtones coming off the snare. The calf tone is nice on the snare, but it's it's that sort of calf skin vibe, and on my snare I need to have a lot more range. So that's what I've been using. On my studio kit, I use the UV1 coated on my toms and bass drum, and then same, like on one of my snare drums I have a UV1, and then I have a G1, and then they also have some other cool things as well, like it's kind of like an etched thing I use on, like, because I have a concert snare drum set up in my studio for my students. So I use kind of more of that like etched series. It reminds you of like a Remo Renaissance, but it's Evans kind of her take on it. And I really, really love that. Matter of fact, I have to look up what it is so I can give the right.
Is that the Strata or the J1?
Yeah, the Strata. I think, yeah, Aaron will kill me. It's this. The Strata 1000. Because that's the other thing. I love Evans, but they have so many names for it. So Aaron and I laugh. Aaron Bishop, who's their rep, I laugh because I'm like, I don't know what the name of it is, but it sounds like this. He's like, oh, it's the this, or it's the So I'm still getting my names together. But, yeah.
So you're using that EMAD calf tone on your jazz kit?
Yeah. So let me clarify. I use 18 and 20 inch bass drums. So when I'm playing big band, I use a 20. And yes, I use the EMAD. I think it's like the EMAD 4 calf tone. And I really like it because I need the punch. I'm playing, big band, but we got some funk tunes and stuff. So like I need that 20 to hit. When I get to my 18, I use just the calf tone 18, with no kind of stuff in there. And then I use a little towel, to kind of get some of the muffling, but I want the tone. But again, that's what I love about the calf tone, is that it focuses that sound. Because even when I used to use like a coated head, again, you get all the overtones, and it almost takes like 2 to 3 weeks for that ambassador and, to settle in. And even then, it still sounds like your bass drum is a tom. And I'm of the kind of like, I love bebop drumming, but I'm still of the like mindset. Like I want my bass drums to sound like bass drums. I don't want them to sound like many toms. Now I have a setup. Tama's about to send me another bass drum soon, but it's like a 16. Well, with the 16, I'm cool for it to sound like a tom, but even their 16 is punchy. But I'm not into that like bass, like bass 4-tom stuff. Like I want to press on that pedal, and I want to hear the low end of a kit.
What's your drum set? What Tama? Right, you play Tama?
So I'm using Tama. I've been with Tama now for probably like 7-8 years. I really love their drums, man. They're one of the only, and if I ruffle some feathers here, I could care less, but they're one of the only companies that are hand making drums. And I've always been a fan of Japanese manufacturing. I feel like, I used to be a Yamaha guy years ago, and Yamaha pre what they're doing now. I think they're still making good drums, but they're it's different. But Tama, I use their Star Series, and their Star Series is great because it's a type of series that is the highest level of drum making. When I got my drums, I got like 5 postcards from like different incredible Japanese craftsmen with their names. I like saw their faces. And they're like, I did this and I did that and I did this. And that to me is the kind of instrument I want to play, because that's the level of, artistry that I'm bringing to the kit of like, really giving my all and giving my best. So I use the Star Series Maple. That's the kit that I, kind of take around. And then at home in my studio, I have the Star Series Walnut, which I freaking love because it's the best of both worlds. Like the Maple is really clear and like just, really punchy and low. You can tweak them up and make them sound like a bop kit. You can, tweak them down, make them sound like a funk kit. But they're just, the Maple kit is just like a clean, beautiful set of drums. The Walnut has a lot of character and it has a lot of warmth. So I feel like with Maple, you get the attack. With Walnut, you get the warmth. So even when you lay into the drum, it's just more warmth coming, and so I feel like in the tone, the tones are really beautiful. So those are the kits that I have. But then I really dig all of Tama's like low end stuff too. Like I love their Swing Star stuff. I love like one of my mentees, he just got I think it's the hybrid Maple Birch Star Classic. No drums sound killing, and even when I've been on the road, I've had to use different drums. Their Babinga, Star Series is killing. So like when I look at a drum company, obviously I like to play the high end stuff, but I also like a drum company that if I play something lower end or entry level, I still want to hear that same level of excellence in the drums. And what I like about Tama is that from, their jam, club jam, $300-$400 kit all the way up to, my series of drums that I have, they all have that same attention to detail on how they craft the drums and the snare drums. So, I really like them because I feel like there's only about maybe 2 or 3 companies that are hand making their stuff with that kind of detail, which, also means it takes longer to get it. But by the time you get it, it's an instrument that, and about this, like it's an instrument that grows and evolves. Like what drums are you playing?
Oh, in here, it's an old Ludwig 68 kit. But I have Bucks County Drums. He's a good friend of mine in Pennsylvania. And that's why I use this stuff, because I know he's the only person making that drum. He's making the shells. He's shaping the edges. Like we have conversations about tone every week or so. Right.
And that's another thing. Like, so I also have a relationship with Noble and Cooley, and I use their snare drum. And that's, that's the thing to me, when you deal with a drum company that is making a drum, and to your point, like they can talk to you and be like nerds about the bearing edges and all that. It may seem menial or kind of like, just not relevant. But when you sit down and you strike into that drum versus striking into another drum that doesn't have that same artistry, it's been, created in an assembly line in the middle of nowhere, and just throw some cheap heads on there. I find that the really great drums, they make art before you start making art. Like, you put your finger on a Noble and Cooley drum, or even like that Ludwig kit you got, from the 60s. You just tap it and the drum's already making music.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I think for me, it's less work when the drum is already crafted in such a way where it's helping me make music versus other scenarios where that's not the case.
We haven't talked about your cymbals. What's your current cymbal setup?
Man, I'm a cymbal freak, man. I love Zildjian. I've been with Zildjian for a long time. I think there are other companies out there making great stuff, but I think Zildjian has the consistency. I also love it that I've been using prototypes. So I have a few different setups. One setup is a 21-inch prototype ride cymbal, a 20 kind of bounce ride, like K Constantinople kind of ride bounce-ish. I'm using, I always have like either like this really killing K 19 cluster crash. It's beautiful. And then I always have some kind of an effect cymbal. So like right now I've been messing around with their new like raw crash. Mm-hmm. I also have like their K Dark Extreme, which has all the holes in it. And I really dig that. And then I always have like some kind of a splash cymbal, like whether it's like the A custom, effect splash or a K custom effect splash, like a 10 or 12. And then hi-hats. Recently they sent me some concept hats that are like 13. So I use a concept 13 on the top, and on the bottom I use a K Dark 13. And it sounds really nice, kind of creamy. But then I love, big hats too. I use like 16s, like I love the Avida series. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the, kind of what the new beats used to be. Like the new beat, hats, that was like everybody's like general hi-hats. I really feel that the Avida series is that series, like it's that sound where like if you don't have a lot of money and you just like, you need to get one pair of hi-hats and you need them to work for a lot of different things. I think the Avidus is a series where you could play jazz, you could play rock, you play, like whatever you need. And that's what I also love about Zildjian is the variety, So yeah, I use it. I got a lot of cymbals, but it always is a 22-inch, ride, kind of a dark 21 or 22, then like a 20 with a rivet. My left side cymbal always has at least 1 or 2 rivets because I play a lot of ballads and things where I need that color. And then, like I said, I love that sort of thin crash, like just a pure crash, especially for big band, because laying into the crash with the rivets is cool, but sometimes I need something that's quick and gets out of the way. Mm-hmm. And the cluster, or I love the Constantinople 18 thin crash or medium crash. Like all of those are great as well. Or sometimes I'll do like just a dark K17 or 18, like anything that's just kind of in and out. And then, like I said, something trashy. So I like to make sure, like Lewis Nash told me many years ago, your ride cymbal is your planet Earth. And then all the other symbols are like the surrounding planets. And so you want to make sure, like, obviously you start with like, what is the symbol that's going to, nurture all your musical possibilities. And then once you have that, you then want to pair everything else kind of around that to be complementary to that. Like it's always funny to me, like nowadays I hear drummers with these dark cymbals, or they put tape on their cymbals. And I don't understand that, because I'm like, a cymbal is meant to sustain and to ring and to be able to create a lot of possibilities. And it's your technique that can decide how you want that cymbal to move, versus people who, put all this tape and shit on the cymbal. They're trying to control it around their insufficiencies. Mm-hmm. So I would say to any drummers that are watching this interview, take the tape off your cymbal. And if you want a drier cymbal, then get a drier cymbal. But if you have a cymbal that has a lot of sound, figure out how to alter your touch, or even get a different stick. I know some people who, if they're looking for like a really light sound, they'll play a lighter stick. If they want like the cymbal to get a bigger spread, they'll play a bigger bead. So learn how to alter your technique and or stick selection to be able to manipulate the cymbal as it is, versus, it's like fighting somebody and holding them down so you could beat them up. It's like, nah, man, learn how to box, So.
I just had a boxing conversation with Brenton Buckley for last week. So, all right, I know you got to run, so let's wrap it up.
Cool. I'll take a few. I'll take a few more.
A prescription for, we're going to send somebody off. If you're going to give them 1 or 2 records that you think they should listen to for ride cymbal, 1 or 2 records for comping, 1 or 2 records for soloing.
Man, that's so hard.
I know it's hard.
All
I'm
right.
putting you on the spot.
So I will say, if you are serious about playing jazz and you want to understand the how this music was constructed, you have to start with Kenny Clark. Mm-hmm. My entry point to Kenny Clark was through Kenny Washington, and he told me to pick up the Miles Davis record called Walking. It's a really beautiful record. I think it was made like in the late 40s. But great record, and it is just some really beautiful ride cymbal playing. And what's interesting is when you hear Kenny on that record, the ride cymbal playing. So I know I've been talking about this over and over again, but for those that don't know, the basic ride cymbal pattern is 1, 2, 3, 4, dang, dang, da dang, dang, da dang, dang, da dang. Or I like to say, dang, spang, galang, spang, galang, spang, galang. That's the basic ride pattern, which is based around triplets. Right? Well, what's really hip about Kenny Cart is that Kenny Cart on that record is doing like. And if you notice, a lot of the older drummers like him, Connie K, some of those early swing drummers, their ride cymbal beat was much more ding, da, ding, ding. It was a little bit more 16th note oriented. So I think it's important for drummers to hear that. And then, because most of us start with Tony, and that's like way down the line, know. So anyway, so that's the first thing. I think Walking is a great record. And I also think that Jimmy Cobb on Kinda Blue, which is still one of the highest grossing or selling jazz records ever. I think Jimmy Cobb does some of the most beautiful ride cymbal playing, like on Freddie the Freeloader, dang, 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 da, da, dang. I mean, it's just right. It's just right down the middle, nothing mysterious. So I think those two records really show like kind of unadulterated like ride cymbal playing. As it pertains to comping, I think Philly Joe Jones, Milestones, which is Miles Davis's record as well. I think that's a really great. It's like a dream list, right? Like to hear all that, like really just precise. I think that's great. And then I also think Art Taylor, any of the stuff he did, with Cedar Walton, whatever. But specifically, I think about the John Coltrane record, Giant Steps. But any Art Taylor, I think those guys are really great because they understand like they can play like really busy, but it's like the comping is really supportive. Like it really makes sense. And versus now you have a lot of guys who are just playing patterns like, it's like all over the drums, but it's not comping. And I always say to people, comping it should be a supportive thing. Comping is something that, like if you say to me, hey man, I'm going to the store. I say, oh, cool. Would you like me to go with you? That's an accompaniment to what you're doing, not, hey man, I'm going to the store. Man, actually, I don't really care about what you're doing. Man, you want to hear about my day? Right? Like so nothing I said compliments or assists you in what you're talking about. And that's what I tell people, I use that analogy a lot, but that's what we do musically. Somebody will play, beat, bop, ba-hoo, ba-hoo, da-hee, ba-hoo-ha. And you'll hear somebody being like, and I'm like, what does that actually have to do with what that person played, as opposed to you hear like beep, ba, ta, do, da, ba, 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 boo, ba, do, ba, 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 da. Right? Like that's what comping is. When it comes to soloing, I mean, I think Alvin is an incredible solo, cat. There's a track called Ray L. I feel like it's on a Duke Pearson record, or no, maybe it's on the Elvin record. I can't remember, but Elvin takes like 8 or so out front. It's some of the most beautiful soloing ever. And then I would say Max Roach, any of that Clifford Brown and Max Roach, studying Brown or like any of that stuff. I mean, Max plays so much stuff, and he's constructing beautiful. He's constructing like melodies on the drums. So I think those are some records that I think are really great, because I always say people, you got to go back to like the beginning. I mean, I'm not going to take people as far back as like, Baby Dodds, with that. But I think that you cannot talk about soloing and any of that stuff without dealing with those guys. And I kind of want to interject as well. I want to encourage drummers to play brushes. I'm very big on brush playing, and I'm a huge advocate for it. I think that every drummer, even if they're a jazz drummer or rock drummer or whatever, like everybody knows a rock groove and a funk. So I feel like brushes should be the same thing. And with that said, I want everybody to check out Homage and Balls Live at the Pershing with the great drummer Vernell Fournier. I think that is one of the seminal records of jazz drumming, not just brush playing, I think Brunel is his own vocabulary. And if you call yourself a jazz drummer and you've never checked out Brunel Fournier, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. So yeah, those are some things I think you should check out.
Sweet, man. Well, thank you for hanging out. I know you've got to run and do some more teaching. Cool. What is the best way for people to keep up to date with what you're doing? Well,
first of all, I got to plug my books. Yeah, man. So please check out Jazz Brushes for the Modern Drummer. I released it on Hal Leonard's publication, or with that publisher, about 2 years ago. So, if you want to go further into jazz brushes and learning, it's again multidimensional. It's a book. It's also a play along that I designed for you to play along. It's also a video. So it's really cool, and it's kind of a historical text. I actually do go back to the very beginning of early 1900s of who are some of the pioneers of this art form. So please check that out. I also have a career entrepreneurship book called The Musician's Career Guide: Turning Your Talent into Sustained Success. That was distributed by Simon & Schuster. And so, once you're kind of not dealing with the instrument and you're trying to deal with strategy and making moves, check that out. In terms of following me, USOJazzy or, UlyssesOwensJr.com, which will lead you to USOJazzy, USOJazzy.com. Also Instagram. I love Instagram, as you know. Very active on there. So I'm at Ulysses Owens Jr. _. Also Facebook and Twitter and all that. But I think Instagram is my favorite. So you can find me there. And if you want to reach out to me on my website, there's ways to reach me. So I tell people I'm very, very accessible. Like if people send me a message just like you did, and it's a genuine message, I will respond to you. If you want me to check out your videos, you want me to, listen to your records, like I'm busy. But if you send me a genuine message connecting with me, I pride myself on trying to respond to as many people as possible. Because, I remember, when I first got into this music, and, Mulgrew Miller and Lewis Nash and all the great drummers, they would, musicians, they would all reach back out to me. They would, they would talk to me. They would send me messages, because this music is about the community. Mm-hmm. So I try to, be that resource for as many musicians as I possibly can. So.
Right on. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you, man.
That's it for this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed that chat with Ulysses. If you like the show, please drop us a 5-star rating and a review over on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. That helps spread the word. And until next week, stay safe, stay warm, and I'll see you then.